Private Brian Ross grits his teeth as he contemplates the unthinkable. Intimate contact with the galaxy's most repulsive species to save humanity. His damaged ship spirals toward the Wadi homeworld, alarms blaring and systems failing. The fierce space battle rages on above, but Brian's fight for survival has only just begun. The ship slams into the alien landscape, metal screeching as it tears apart. Brian's head whips forward, vision blurring. When he regains consciousness, he finds himself surrounded by twisted wreckage and unfamiliar terrain. Harsh winds whip across a barren plain dotted with strange bulbous vegetation. Brian winces, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. As sole survivor of the crash, Brian knows he's in hostile territory. The Wadi, infamous for their lumpy, asymmetrical bodies and protruding sensory organs, are locked in a bitter war with humanity over resource-rich planets. Discovery means certain death, or worse. Brian limps away from the crash site, each step sending shocks of pain through his battered body. He needs shelter and medical attention fast. The alien sun beats down mercilessly as he struggles across the desolate landscape. Suddenly, movement catches his eye. Brian ducks behind a rocky outcropping, heart pounding. A figure emerges from a hidden crevice. Unmistakably Wadi, its misshapen form shifts as it scans the area with bulging eye stalks. Brian holds his breath, knowing discovery could end his life. But to his shock, the Wadi approaches cautiously and makes a gesture that seems almost friendly. "I am Nina," the alien says in halting English. "I help you." Stunned, Brian allows Nina to lead him to an abandoned structure on the outskirts of a Wadi settlement. As she tends his wounds, Nina explains she's fascinated by human culture, risking severe punishment to aid an enemy. Over the coming days, as Brian recuperates in hiding, Nina shares a shocking secret: the Wadi face extinction due to a genetic defect hampering reproduction. Their leadership conceals this dire threat, fearing it would weaken their galactic standing. Nina's eyes shimmer with intensity as she proposes a radical solution. "Human DNA may save Wadi. We must attempt breeding." Brian recoils at the suggestion of intimacy with a Wadi. Yet as he spends time with Nina, he sees past her alien appearance to her brilliant mind and kind heart. A dangerous attraction grows. Now Brian faces an impossible choice, with the fate of two species hanging in the balance. His duty as a soldier clashes with his feelings for Nina and the chance to end this war through unconventional means. As they secretly work to overcome biological barriers, Brian and Nina must evade both Wadi authorities and potential human rescue parties. With time running out, only Brian dares to attempt the unthinkable, and the ugliest species in the galaxy may hold the key to humanity's future. Brian's mind reeled as he processed Nina's proposal. The idea of intimate contact with a Wadi still turned his stomach, but he couldn't deny the growing connection between them. As he wrestled with his conflicting emotions, Nina began to unveil the hidden depths of her species. "There's something you need to understand about us," Nina said, her eye stalks quivering with nervous energy. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. "We Wadi have a unique ability, one that's kept secret from outsiders." Brian leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "What kind of ability?" Nina's form began to shimmer, her lumpy exterior seeming to melt away. Brian blinked, sure his eyes were playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, he gasped. Where the misshapen Wadi had stood moments before, a stunningly beautiful humanoid figure now took her place. How is this possible?" Brian stammered, unable to tear his eyes away from Nina's transformed appearance. "It's an evolutionary adaptation," Nina explained, her voice unchanged despite her altered form. "Our females can physically transform to appear attractive to potential mates of any species. It helped us survive in harsh environments with limited genetic diversity." As Nina reverted to her natural Wadi form, Brian's mind raced with the implications of this revelation. The biological barriers he'd assumed were insurmountable suddenly seemed less daunting. He opened his mouth to respond, but a distant sound cut him off, the unmistakable whine of Wadi patrol vehicles. "We need to move," Nina hissed, already gathering their meager supplies. "That's Commander Zax's patrol. If they find you, They'll torture you for information. Heart pounding, Brian followed Nina out of their hiding place and into the alien wilderness. They scrambled over rocky terrain, ducking behind strange vegetation whenever the patrol's searchlights swept near. The chase seemed to last for hours, their pursuers always just a step behind. As they crested a hill, an ancient structure loomed before them, its weathered stone walls a stark contrast to the sleek wadi architecture Brian had glimpsed earlier. The old temple, Nina breathed, her eye stalks widening in recognition. We might find shelter there. They slipped inside just as Zax's patrol crested the hill behind them. The temple's interior was cool and dark, filled with dust and the whisper of forgotten secrets. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, holographic displays flickered to life around them, bathing the chamber in an eerie blue glow. "What is this place?" Brian asked, awed by the ancient technology still functioning after countless years. Nina moved from display to display, her eye stalks twitching as she absorbed the information. "It's our true history," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We were once a peaceful, space-faring civilization. We valued genetic diversity, sought out contact with other species." Her voice hardened. "Until the ruling elite imposed their isolationist policies." As they delved deeper into the temple's archives, a chilling truth emerged. The genetic defect threatening wadi extinction wasn't a natural occurrence. It was the result of centuries of enforced isolation and xenophobia. A loud crash from the temple entrance jolted them back to their present danger. "They're breaking through," Brian said, tension coiling in his muscles. Nina's eye stalks swiveled towards an ornate pedestal at the center of the chamber. "There's something else here," she said, moving towards it. "An ancient prophecy." As Nina activated the final hologram, a shimmering image appeared. A wadi and a being that looked remarkably like a human, standing together. The holographic figures were surrounded by symbols of renewal and prosperity. "It speaks of a union between our species," Nina translated, her voice filled with wonder. "An otherworldly being whose arrival would herald a new era for the wadi." She turned to Brian, her eye stalks focusing intently on his face. "It describes someone who looks just like you." The implications hit Brian like a physical blow. Could their meeting truly have been destined? Before he could fully process the idea, the sound of Zax's troops grew louder. "We need to broadcast this," Brian said, gesturing to the historical records and the prophecy. "To both wadi and humans. It could change everything." Nina nodded, her appendages already working the temple's ancient controls. As she prepared the transmission, Brian took up a defensive position near the entrance, makeshift weapon in hand. The first of Zax's troops breached the temple just as Nina called out, "It's ready!" Brian fought his way back to her side, using every trick he'd learned in combat training to hold off the wadi soldiers. He reached Nina just as Commander Zax himself entered the chamber, his misshapen face contorted with rage. Nina's appendage found Brian's hand as they stood before the transmission controls. Their eyes met, human and wadi, united in purpose. Together they activated the array. A burst of energy pulsed outward from the temple, carrying with it the truth of wadi history and the promise of a shared future. As the signal raced towards both wadi and human forces, Brian and Nina turned to face the advancing troops, uncertain of their fate, but knowing they had changed the course of two civilizations forever. The energy pulse from the temple's transmission array surged outward, carrying with it the truth of wadi history and the promise of a shared future. Brian and Nina turned to face the advancing troops, their fingers intertwined as they braced for whatever came next. Commander Zax burst into the chamber, his misshapen face contorted with rage. "Seize them!" he bellowed, pointing a gnarled appendage at Brian and Nina. Brian's military training kicked in. He pushed Nina behind him and grabbed a fallen wadi weapon, its alien design feeling awkward in his hands. "Stay back," he warned, aiming at the approaching soldiers. The first wadi to reach them received a swift kick to what Brian assumed was its midsection, sending it sprawling. He fired the weapon, and a burst of energy struck another soldier, paralyzing it instantly. Nina's eye stalks swiveled rapidly, taking in the chaotic scene. "Brian, I have an idea," she said, her voice barely audible above the commotion. Before Brian could respond, Nina's form began to shimmer and shift. Suddenly, multiple versions of her appeared around the room, each one an exact replica. The Wadi soldiers hesitated, confused by the sudden proliferation of targets. Taking advantage of their uncertainty, Brian charged forward, using his human agility to weave between the lumbering Wadi. He struck with precision, disarming and disabling soldiers with efficient hand-to-hand combat moves. Nina's decoys added to the confusion, drawing fire and attention away from Brian. She even created several images of Brian himself, making it nearly impossible for the Wadi to determine which was the real human. As Brian grappled with a particularly large Wadi soldier, the temple floor beneath them began to vibrate. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber bathed in soft blue light. An invisible force yanked Brian and Nina inside, a shimmering energy barrier springing up behind them. "No!" Commander Zax roared, pounding his appendages against the force field. "Break through it! Now!" Inside the chamber, Brian and Nina found themselves surrounded by sleek, pulsing machinery. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing complex DNA strands rotating in midair. "What is this place?" Brian asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Nina moved to a central console, her appendages dancing over the controls. It's a DNA recombination device," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This technology is far beyond anything my people possess today. It must be a relic from our scientifically advanced past." The sounds of Zax's troops attempting to breach the force field echoed through the chamber. Brian glanced nervously at the barrier. "How long will that hold?" Nina's eye stalks drooped. "Not long enough. But Brian, this device, it might be the key to everything. It could stabilize and improve the Wadi genetic code. It could save my species." Brian's mind raced, processing the implications. He looked at Nina, seeing past her alien features to the brilliant, compassionate being he'd come to care for. "What do we need to do?" Nina's appendages trembled slightly as she explained. "The device requires genetic material from both species. It would combine our DNA, creating a viable human-Wadi hybrid." Brian swallowed hard, the magnitude of the decision weighing on him. "You mean we need to—" Nina nodded, her eye stalks focusing intently on Brian's face. "Yes, it's intimate and intense, and it's our only chance." For a moment, Brian hesitated. Then he thought of the war, the countless lives lost on both sides, and the possibility of peace. He reached out and took Nina's appendage in his hand. "Let's do it." They stepped onto a circular platform in the center of the chamber. The machinery hummed to life, bathing them in a soft, pulsing light. Brian felt a tingling sensation throughout his body as the device began its work. The process was unlike anything Brian had ever experienced. He felt a deep connection to Nina, their very essences intertwining on a molecular level. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and profound. As the light faded, a small, transparent cylinder rose from the center of the platform. Inside, floating in a nutrient-rich solution, was a single embryo, the culmination of their genetic merger and the potential key to saving the Wadi species. Nina carefully lifted the cylinder, cradling it as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. "We did it," she whispered. The force field flickered and died. Brian readied himself for another fight, but instead of Wadi soldiers, he saw a team of humans in combat gear rushing into the chamber, led by a fierce-looking woman with captain's insignia. "Captain Sarah Chen," the woman said, her weapon trained on Nina. "We're here to rescue you, Private Ross." Brian quickly stepped between Nina and the rescue team. "Wait, don't shoot. This isn't what it looks like." Before he could explain further, Commander Zax and his troops pushed into the chamber, creating a tense three-way standoff. Brian's heart raced as he realized the fate of two species now rested in his hands. "Everyone, please," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the sounds of weapons being readied. "We have a chance for peace here. Real, lasting peace." All eyes turned to Brian as he began to outline the Wadi's genetic crisis, the ancient prophecy, and the potential for cooperation between their species. He held up the cylinder containing the embryo, his voice filled with conviction. This is living proof that we're compatible, that we can work together for a better future. A murmur ran through both groups. Captain Chen's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. Commander Zax's appendages twitched nervously. Sensing their skepticism, Nina stepped forward. Her form shimmered and changed, taking on an appearance that blended human and Wadi features seamlessly. Gasps of surprise echoed through the chamber. "This is what our future could look like," Nina said, her voice resonating with hope. "A perfect union of our species." The standoff continued, weapons still raised on all sides. The tension in the air was palpable as both humans and Wadi grappled with the revelations before them. Suddenly, the temple's systems sprang to life once more. A massive hologram appeared in the center of the chamber, depicting an ancient Wadi figure. Its voice, translated into both human and modern Wadi languages, filled the room. "Hear me, children of two worlds. The prophecy has been fulfilled. The union of human and Wadi holds the key to our shared future. Know that you were once one people, separated by the vastness of space but destined to reunite. The path of war leads only to destruction. The path of cooperation leads to salvation for all." The hologram faded, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Commander Zax's appendages trembled as he lowered his weapon. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Have we been fighting our own kin?" Captain Chen stepped forward, her own weapon now pointed at the ground. "We need to contact our superiors immediately. This changes everything." As the implications of the revelation sank in, Brian felt Nina's appendage slip into his hand. They shared a look of cautious optimism as the seeds of peace began to take root around them. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since the war began, there was hope. Brian, Nina, and the precious embryo they had created stood at the center of a new era, one that held the promise of unity between two long-lost branches of the same cosmic family tree. The tense standoff in the ancient Wadi temple gradually eased as the gravity of the situation sank in. Captain Chen lowered her weapon, her eyes darting between Brian, Nina, and the precious cylinder they held. "We need to contact our superiors immediately," Chen repeated, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. She tapped her comm device, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. Commander Zax's appendages twitched nervously as he regarded the hybrid embryo. His troops remained on edge, weapons still half raised. This changes everything," he muttered, echoing Chen's earlier sentiment. Brian felt Nina's grip tighten on his hand. He squeezed back reassuringly, acutely aware of the fragile piece that hung in the balance. After several tense minutes, Captain Chen turned to address the group. "I've received authorization to establish a temporary truce," she announced. "We're setting up a joint research team to study the embryo in this temple's technology." Commander Zax's eye stalks swiveled rapidly, processing the information. "And what guarantees do we have that you won't simply take this knowledge for yourselves?" he demanded. "The same guarantees you have," Chen countered. "We'll be working side by side, full transparency." As the two leaders hammered out the details, Brian and Nina found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Within days, a secure research facility sprouted near the temple site, a testament to both human and Wadi engineering prowess. The facility buzzed with activity as scientists from both species worked feverishly to unlock the secrets of the ancient Wadi technology. Brian and Nina, as the parents of the hybrid embryo, became central figures in the research efforts. Nina's shape-shifting abilities proved invaluable, allowing her to interface with both human and Wadi equipment seamlessly. Brian, drawing on his military training, helped coordinate security measures to protect the fragile truce. Weeks passed and progress came in leaps and bounds. The research team made a groundbreaking discovery. The hybrid embryo possessed enhanced genetic stability, potentially solving the Wadi's reproductive crisis. "This is incredible," Dr. Lena Sato, the lead human geneticist, exclaimed as she examined the latest test results. "The combination of human and Wadi DNA has created a level of genetic resilience we've never seen before." Nina's eye stalks quivered with emotion as she processed the implications. "You mean, my people might have a future after all?" The news spread quickly, igniting a spark of hope among the Wadi population. Centuries of xenophobia began to crumble as many Wadis started to view humans not as enemies, but as potential saviors. However, not everyone welcomed these developments. General Krell, a hardline Wadi military leader, watched the growing cooperation with mounting anger. "This is an abomination," Krell snarled, addressing a group of like-minded officers in a secure bunker, far from the research facility. "These humans will be the death of our culture, our very way of life." On the human side, similar sentiments brewed. Colonel Marcus Graves arrived at the facility, his unwavering focus and rigid posture betraying his distaste for the joint operation. "I'm here to oversee our interests," Graves informed Captain Chen, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We can't afford to let our guard down." As political machinations churned beneath the surface, Brian and Nina found solace in each other's company. Late one night, they stood on a balcony overlooking the sprawling research complex. Nina shifted her form, taking on a more human appearance. She leaned into Brian's embrace, her now human eyes reflecting the starlight. "Do you think we're making a difference?" she asked softly. Brian pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her hybrid form against him. "I have to believe we are," he replied. "Look at all we've accomplished already." Their moment of peace was shattered by a sudden commotion in the lab below. Alarms blared as researchers rushed to contain a malfunctioning piece of equipment. "It's the tertiary containment field," Dr. Sato's voice carried over the din. "We're losing stability." Brian and Nina sprinted back inside, their brief respite forgotten as they plunged back into the chaotic world of interspecies diplomacy and cutting-edge science. As they worked to stabilize the equipment, neither noticed the shadowy figure slipping away from the facility, a data drive clutched tightly in its grip. In the darkness outside, General Krell's operative transmitted a simple message. "The plan is in motion. Await further instructions." The delicate balance of peace and progress teetered on a knife's edge, with forces both seen and unseen threatening to tip it into chaos. Chaos. The facility's alarms continued to blare as researchers scrambled to contain the malfunctioning equipment. Brian and Nina exchanged a knowing glance, realizing that the time had come to execute their contingency plan. With a subtle nod, Nina's form shimmered and shifted. Her features morphed into those of a Wadi soldier, complete with the distinctive eye stalks and mottled skin. Brian quickly donned a stolen Wadi uniform, grateful for the practice they had put into this deception. "Ready?" Brian whispered, his heart pounding. Nina's newly formed eye stalks swiveled, scanning their surroundings. "Now or never," she replied, her voice a perfect imitation of a Wadi trooper. They slipped away from the main lab, moving with purpose through the crowded corridors. Researchers and security personnel rushed past them, too focused on the unfolding crisis to pay much attention to two more Wadi soldiers. As they navigated the complex's winding passages, Brian's military training kicked in. He led them through less trafficked areas, avoiding main junctions where they might encounter tighter security. Nina's shape-shifting abilities proved invaluable, allowing her to make subtle adjustments to their appearances when needed. They narrowly avoided detection several times. Once they ducked into an empty storage room as a squad of Colonel Graves's human operatives marched past, their faces set in unwavering grit. Minutes later, they pressed themselves against a wall as General Krell himself stormed by, barking orders to his subordinates. The tension mounted with each step. Brian could feel the precious cylinder containing their hybrid embryo pressed against his chest, hidden beneath the Wadi uniform. The weight of their responsibility bore down on him, driving home the importance of their mission. Finally, they reached their destination, a hidden hangar containing experimental Wadi spacecraft. Brian's eyes widened as he took in the sleek, organic lines of the vessels before them. They were unlike any human craft he had ever seen, seeming almost alive in their design. "Which one?" Nina asked, her eye stalks swiveling to scan the various ships. Brian pointed to a smaller craft near the back of the hangar. "That one. Looks faster, more maneuverable. We'll need every advantage we can get." They hurried to the chosen ship. Brian's hands moved over the unfamiliar controls, his brow furrowed in concentration. Years of flight simulator training and combat piloting experience allowed him to quickly grasp the basics of the alien craft's operation. As the ship's systems hummed to life, a distant explosion rocked the facility. Through the hangar's force field, they could see flashes of weapons fire in the night sky. Reinforcements from both sides had arrived, turning the research complex into a battleground. "We need to go now," Nina urged, her borrowed Wadi features tight with concern. Brian nodded, engaging the ship's propulsion system. The craft lifted smoothly, hovering above the hangar floor. With a deep breath, he guided it toward the shimmering force field that separated them from the chaos outside. They burst through the barrier, the ship's hull briefly glowing as it passed through the energy field. Behind them, the research facility erupted into full-scale battle. Explosions bloomed across the complex, destroying years of collaborative work in moments. Brian pushed the ship's engines to their limit, climbing rapidly through the planet's turbulent atmosphere. Alarms blared as sensors detected pursuit craft launching from both Wadi and human vessels in orbit. "They've spotted us," Nina reported, her eyes stalks focused on the rear sensors. 2 Wadi interceptors and a human assault shuttle, closing fast. Brian's face hardened as he pushed the ship harder, breaking free of the atmosphere and into the inky blackness of space. The pursuers followed, weapons blazing. Energy bolts streaked past their hull, missing by mere meters. As Brian executed a series of evasive maneuvers, weaving through the incoming fire, Nina suddenly gasped in pain. She doubled over, her Wadi form flickering and distorting. "Nina, what's wrong?" Brian called out, torn between concern for her and the need to focus on their escape. "I don't know," Nina gritted out, her voice strained. "Something's happening to me. It's like my body is trying to change, but I can't control it." Brian's mind raced. Could this be a side effect of their close genetic bond with the hybrid embryo? The implications sent a chill down his spine. If Nina's health was linked to the embryo's survival, they needed to find a safe haven more urgently than ever. Ahead, an asteroid field loomed. Brian made a split-second decision, steering the ship directly into the swirling maze of space rocks. It was a dangerous gamble, but their pursuers were closing in, leaving them no choice. The ship danced through the asteroid field, narrowly avoiding collisions as Brian pushed his piloting skills to their limit. Behind them, one of the Wadi interceptors clipped an asteroid, spinning out of control. The human assault shuttle, more cautious, fell back to the edge of the field. But the remaining Wadi ships stayed on their tail, matching Brian's maneuvers with unsettling precision. A lucky shot grazed their hull, sending sparks showering across the cockpit. Warning lights flashed as systems began to fail. "We can't keep this up," Nina warned, her form still fluctuating between Wadi and human features. "The ship's taking too much damage." Brian nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the sensor readouts for any sign of refuge. Suddenly, a blip on the screen caught his attention. "There," he said, adjusting their course. "A moon. If we can just make it there." They burst out of the asteroid field, the Wadi interceptor still in hot pursuit. The moon loomed before them, its pockmarked surface growing larger by the second. Brian aimed for a particularly cratered region, hoping to lose their pursuer in the rugged terrain. As they entered the moon's thin atmosphere, their ship's damaged systems began to fail. Alarms blared as Brian fought to maintain control, searching desperately for a suitable landing site. At the last moment, he spotted a level area near what appeared to be an artificial structure half buried in the lunar soil. The ship hit the ground hard, skidding across the dusty surface before coming to rest against an outcropping of rock. Brian's head swam from the impact, but he forced himself to focus. "Nina," he called out, "are you all right?" Nina groaned, her form finally settling into a strange hybrid of human and Wadi features. "I think so," she managed, "but we need to move. That interceptor will be right behind us." They gathered their meager supplies and the precious embryo container, then made their way out of the battered ship. The structure they had spotted from the air revealed itself to be an entrance of some kind, its architecture unmistakably Wadi in origin. As they approached the ancient doorway, Nina's eyes widened in recognition. This is a Wadi outpost," she breathed. "But it's been abandoned for centuries. What could it be doing out here?" Before Brian could respond, The whine of the interceptor's engines filled the air. "We'll have to figure that out later," he said urgently. "Right now, we need to find cover." They rushed into the outpost, the door sliding shut behind them with a hiss of stale air. As emergency lights flickered to life around them, revealing a vast underground complex, Brian and Nina shared a look of mingled hope and apprehension. They had found shelter, but what other secrets did this long-lost Wadi facility hold? The sound of the interceptor landing outside spurred them into action. Hand in hand, they ventured deeper into the complex, the fate of two species resting in their care as they sought answers in the shadows of an ancient civilization. Facility held? The question lingered in their minds as they ventured deeper into the complex, driven by the sound of the pursuing interceptor outside. As they moved through dimly lit corridors, Brian's eyes darted from one alien console to another, searching for anything that might aid their escape. Suddenly, a flickering light caught his attention. He rushed towards it, Nina close behind. "Look," he whispered, pointing to an ancient control panel. "It's still active." Nina leaned in, her hybrid features contorting with concentration. It's a communication array," she said, her voice a mix of wonder and urgency. "If we can activate it, we might be able to broadcast a message to both fleets." Brian's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, guided by intuition and Nina's occasional directions. The array hummed to life, holographic displays shimmering into existence around them. "We need to show them," Nina said, her form still fluctuating between human and Wadi features. "They need to see what's happening to me, the embryo, everything." Brian nodded, quickly setting up a visual feed. He positioned Nina in front of the camera, ensuring that her transforming body was clearly visible. Then he carefully placed the cylinder containing their hybrid embryo next to her. "Ready?" he asked, his finger hovering over the broadcast button. Nina took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Do it." With a single press, their message beamed out into space, reaching the approaching human and Wadi fleets. Brian watched the transmission indicators, his heart racing as he waited for any response. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Then suddenly, the communication array lit up with incoming signals. Both fleets had received their message and were requesting further information. "It worked," Brian breathed, relief washing over him. "They've stopped advancing." Nina managed a weak smile, but it quickly turned to a grimace of pain. Her body shimmered, the transformation accelerating. Brian rushed to her side, supporting her as she swayed on her feet. "We need to show them more," she gasped. "The genetic library. It's the key to everything." Brian's eyes widened as he remembered the vast database they had discovered earlier. He quickly accessed the outpost systems, retrieving key findings from the ancient genetic library. Using the advanced Wadi technology, he created a holographic projection of themselves, the embryo, and the crucial genetic data. As the projection flickered to life, transmitted to the command ships of both fleets, Brian felt a surge of hope. This was their chance to explain, to make both sides understand the importance of what they had discovered. The holographic meeting began, tense voices from both human and Wadi leaders filling the air. Brian and Nina stood side by side, presenting their case with urgency and passion. They explained the hybrid embryo, the ancient genetic library, and the potential it held for both species. Suddenly, Nina doubled over, crying out in pain. Her body began to emit a strange, pulsating energy signature. The outpost systems reacted violently, alarms blaring as power fluctuated throughout the facility. "Nina!" Brian called out, supporting her as she struggled to remain standing. He turned back to the holographic projection, his voice filled with desperation. "Please, we need help. Something's happening to her, and we can't control it." The facility shook, the stasis pod containing the hybrid embryo beginning to destabilize. Brian watched in horror as warning lights flashed across its control panel. To his amazement, the tone of the conversation shifted. The commanders of both fleets, witnessing the gravity of the situation, agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Orders were given, and within moments, medical teams from both species were dispatched to the moon's surface. As they waited for help to arrive, Brian held Nina close, whispering words of encouragement. The outpost systems continued to fluctuate, reacting to the strange energy emanating from her body. The sound of approaching ships filled the air, and Brian's heart leapt with a mixture of fear and hope. As the medical teams rushed in, he found himself surrounded by a mix of human and Wadi doctors, all focused on the task at hand. "Please," Brian said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Help her." The doctors sprang into action, their initial wariness giving way to professional focus. Human and Wadi medical equipment was quickly set up, creating an impromptu operating theater in the heart of the ancient outpost. As the medical teams worked to stabilize Nina, Brian turned his attention to the arriving scientific experts. He led them to the genetic library, explaining what they had discovered so far. "This could be the key to everything," he said, gesturing to the vast database. The ancient Wadi had developed a way to guide interspecies reproduction safely. If we can unlock these secrets, we might be able to save Nina and ensure our child's survival. The scientists, both human and Wadi, dove into the data with fervor. The atmosphere in the outpost began to change, the initial tension giving way to a sense of shared purpose. As Brian moved between the medical area and the research team, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The sight of humans and Wadi working side by side, combining their knowledge and skills to tackle this unprecedented challenge, was nothing short of miraculous. But even as cooperation blossomed, danger lurked in the shadows. Unbeknownst to the others, a figure moved silently through the outpost, eyes darting furtively from side to side. The sleeper agent, buried deep within the human ranks, had a single purpose: to destroy the newfound peace before it could take root. As the agent crept closer to the heart of the facility, Brian's instincts kicked in. Something felt off. He scanned the room, his military training heightening his awareness of every movement, every shadow. Suddenly he spotted a flash of movement near the genetic library's main console. Without hesitation, Brian lunged forward, shouting a warning to the others. The next few moments were a blur of action. The saboteur, realizing they had been spotted, abandoned stealth for speed. They rushed towards the console, a small but powerful explosive device in hand. Brian tackled the attacker, his body slamming into theirs just as they reached for the genetic database. They grappled on the ground, the explosive device skittering across the floor. "Security!" Brian yelled, struggling to subdue the saboteur. "We have an intruder!" Both human and Wadi security forces responded instantly, converging on the scene. As they secured the saboteur, Brian scrambled to his feet, his eyes searching for the explosive. He spotted it near a bank of critical life support systems. With a burst of speed, he reached for the device, his hand closing around it just as its timer began to count down. "Everyone out!" Brian shouted, running towards the nearest airlock. "It's going to blow!" He reached the airlock, sealed it behind him, and waited for the device to detonate. The explosion rocked the outpost, but the damage was contained. When Brian re-entered the main chamber, he found the life support systems damaged but not destroyed. As the dust settled, Brian surveyed the scene. The saboteur had been neutralized, but the attack had taken its toll. Warning lights flashed across control panels, indicating failing systems throughout the outpost. Nina's condition, too, continued to deteriorate. The medical teams worked frantically, but it was clear that time was running out. Brian's mind raced, searching for a solution. His eyes fell on the ancient stasis pods they had discovered earlier. A risky plan began to form in his mind. He approached the leaders of both teams, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I have a proposal," he began, outlining his daring idea to use the Wadi stasis technology. As he spoke, he could see the weight of the decision in their eyes. It was a gamble, but with the outpost systems failing and Nina's condition worsening, it might be their only chance. The room fell silent as the leaders considered the proposal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they nodded their agreement. "Do it," the Wadi commander said, his voice solemn. "We're with you," added the human leader. With their blessing, Brian set the plan in motion. A joint team of human and Wadi scientists and engineers swarmed around the ancient stasis pods, working against time to prepare them for use. As the preparations neared completion, Brian made his way to Nina's side. She looked up at him, her features a mesmerizing blend of human and Wadi, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and tenacity. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, taking her hand in his. Nina nodded, squeezing his hand. "Together," she whispered. Brian helped her to her feet, supporting her as they walked towards the waiting stasis pods. The hybrid embryo, still in its separate unit, was carefully placed between their pods. As they prepared to enter the stasis chambers, Brian looked around at the assembled humans and Wadi. Despite their differences, they had come together in this moment of crisis. It gave him hope for the future they were fighting to create. "Take care of them," Brian said, nodding towards the embryo and the genetic library. "They're the key to everything." With final nods of acknowledgement from both sides, Brian and Nina stepped into their respective pods. As the ancient technology hummed to life around them, Brian caught Nina's eye one last time. They shared a look of love and hope before the stasis field enveloped them, plunging them into a deep, timeless sleep. As the pods sealed shut, the assembled team stood in reverent silence. The soft glow of the stasis fields illuminated the determined faces of humans and Wadi alike, united in their mission to preserve this fragile hope for the future. Outside the outpost, the joint fleet hung in space, a testament to the unprecedented cooperation between the two species. As news of the events on the moon began to spread, minds and hearts across both human and Wadi space began to open to new possibilities. The stasis pods containing Brian, Nina, and their hybrid child stood as silent sentinels, guardians of a future yet to be written. Around them, human and Wadi scientists began the monumental task of decoding the ancient genetic library, searching for the key that would unlock the pod and usher in a new era of interspecies harmony. But even as hope bloomed, challenges loomed on the horizon. The saboteurs' attack had been thwarted, but it was a stark reminder that not everyone embraced this new future. As the joint human-Wadi team prepared to relocate the outpost and its precious cargo, they knew that their journey was not nearly finished. In the depths of space, aboard ships and stations throughout both territories, the story of Brian and Nina began to spread. It was a tale of love, sacrifice, and the potential for a shared destiny. As it touched hearts and minds, it sparked debates, fears, and dreams in equal measure. The stage was set for a new chapter in the history of both species. As the stasis pods were carefully loaded for transport, the assembled team couldn't help but feel the weight of history on their shoulders. They were no longer just humans or Wadi. They were the custodians of a shared future, one that held both great promise and great peril. With the precious cargo secured, the joint fleet began its journey to the newly constructed research facility. As they moved through the star-studded void, the sleeping forms of Brian and Nina served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. The human commander gazed out at the vast expanse of space, her mind filled with the possibilities that lay ahead. Beside her, her Wadi counterpart stood in contemplative silence. Both knew that this was only the beginning of a long and challenging journey. As the fleet moved steadily towards its destination, the story of Brian and Nina continued to ripple outward, touching lives across the galaxy and setting in motion events that would shape the future of both species for generations to come. As the fleet moved steadily towards its destination, the story of Brian and Nina continued to ripple outward, touching lives across the galaxy and setting in motion events that would shape the future of both species for generations to come. The newly constructed research facility, christened Unity Station, became a beacon of hope and cooperation as it orbited a neutral star system. Within its walls, human and Wadi scientists worked side by side, their shared goal of unlocking the secrets of the ancient genetic library, bridging centuries of mistrust and conflict. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Unity Station grew into a thriving hub of interspecies collaboration, its corridors filled with the constant hum of activity and the mingling of human and Wadi voices. The stasis pods containing Brian, Nina, and their hybrid embryo remained at the heart of the station, a constant reminder of the stakes they all faced. Dr. Aurora Chen, a brilliant young geneticist and sister to Captain Sarah Chen, led the research team tasked with decoding the ancient Wadi reproductive technology. Her days were filled with long hours poring over data, testing hypotheses, and pushing the boundaries of both human and Wadi scientific knowledge. 5 years into their mission, Dr. Chen's persistence paid off. Late one night, as she sat surrounded by holographic displays of genetic sequences, something clicked. Her eyes widened as she realized the significance of what she was seeing. "This is it," she whispered, her fingers flying over the console as she double-checked her findings. "We've done it!" The news of Dr. Chen's breakthrough spread through Unity Station like wildfire. Within hours, the facility was buzzing with excitement as scientists and diplomats alike gathered to hear the details of her discovery. In the station's main auditorium, Dr. Chen stood before a mixed crowd of humans and Wadi, her usual lab coat refilled with a more formal suit for the occasion. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the momentous announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests," she began, her voice clear and strong. "After 5 years of tireless work, I am thrilled to announce that we have successfully decoded the key elements of the ancient Wadi reproductive technology." A murmur of excitement rippled through the audience. Dr. Chen continued, outlining the intricacies of their discovery and its implications for Brian, Nina, and their child. As she spoke, holographic displays flickered to life around her, illustrating the complex genetic mechanisms they had unraveled. "With this knowledge," she concluded, "we now have the means to safely awaken Brian, Nina, and their hybrid embryo from stasis. We can ensure the continued health of both Nina and the child throughout the pregnancy and beyond." The announcement was met with thunderous applause, a mix of human and Wadi voices raised in celebration. As the elation of the moment washed over the crowd, however, an undercurrent of tension began to simmer beneath the surface. Major Zara Knox, Unity Station's security chief, felt a prickle of unease as she scanned the room. Her instincts, honed by years of military service, told her that not everyone present shared in the joy of the moment. She made a mental note to increase security measures and keep a closer eye on potential dissenters. As preparations for the awakening began, Major Knox's concerns proved well-founded. Through her network of informants and advanced surveillance systems, she uncovered 2 separate plots threatening to derail the entire project. On the Wadi side, General Krell, though officially stripped of his rank and power, had been quietly gathering support among conservative factions. His plan, as Knox discovered, was to sabotage the awakening process, believing it would destroy the last hope for peace and reignite the war he so desperately desired. Simultaneously, a group of hardline human military leaders, spearheaded by Admiral Victor Stone, saw the hybrid child as a threat to human genetic purity. They had formulated their own plan to eliminate what they viewed as an abomination. Major Knox wasted no time in responding to these threats. She immediately implemented heightened security protocols throughout Unity Station, placing trusted officers at key points and increasing patrols in sensitive areas. She also reached out to moderate factions on both sides, requesting reinforcements to bolster the station's defenses. As the day of the awakening drew near, tension on Unity Station reached a fever pitch. Dr. Chen and her medical team made final preparations in the high-security medical bay, their movements careful and precise as they readied the equipment needed for the delicate procedure. Major Knox stood in the station's security hub, surrounded by screens displaying every corner of the facility. Her eyes darted from one feed to another, searching for any sign of the impending attacks she knew were coming. The first strike came just as Brian and Nina's stasis pods were being transported to the medical bay. Alarms blared throughout the station as General Krell's loyalists launched their surprise attack. Explosions rocked the lower levels, and the sounds of weapons fire echoed through the corridors. Simultaneously, Admiral Stone's operatives, disguised as medical personnel, attempted to infiltrate the facility. Major Knox's enhanced security measures slowed their progress, but the determined infiltrators pressed on, inching closer to their target with each passing moment. "All security teams, this is Major Knox," her voice rang out over the station's comm system. "We are under attack. Protect the medical bay at all costs. Lethal force is authorized." Knox led a joint human-Wadi security team in defending the station, her years of combat experience evident in every decision she made. The battle raged through Unity Station's corridors, with both sides utilizing advanced weaponry and tactics. The air filled with the acrid smell of weapons fire and the cries of the wounded. In the medical bay, Dr. Chen and her team worked feverishly to initiate the awakening sequence. The sounds of battle grew ever closer, and they knew their time was running out. "We need more time," Dr. Chen shouted over the din, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "If we rush this, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Major Knox's voice crackled over the comm system. "We can't hold them off much longer, Doctor. We need to change the plan." In that moment, Knox made a decision that would alter the course of events. "We're waking Brian up early. His military expertise might be our only chance to turn this around." Dr. Chen's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly understood the necessity of the decision. With practiced efficiency, she redirected her team's efforts, accelerating the awakening process for Brian, while keeping Nina and the embryo in a delicate stage of stasis transition. As Brian's pod hissed open, the battle for Unity Station, in the future of human-Wadi relations, entered its most critical phase. The fate of two species now rested on the shoulders of a man who had slept through 5 years of fragile peace, about to awaken to a nightmare of renewed conflict. Conflict. His eyes snapped open, immediately alert despite years of stasis. The familiar sensation of adrenaline coursed through his veins as he took in the chaos surrounding him. "Brian, we need you." Dr. Chen's voice cut through the cacophony of alarms and weapons fire. She quickly briefed him on the situation as he climbed out of the pod, his military training kicking in despite the disorientation. "What about Nina?" Brian asked, his eyes darting to the adjacent pod where his partner remained in stasis. "She's stable for now," Dr. Chen assured him, "but we need to secure the station first." Without hesitation, Brian joined Major Knox and her security team in repelling the attackers. His combat skills, honed through years of military service, proved invaluable in turning the tide of the battle. Within hours, the combined efforts of Brian, Major Knox, and the loyal staff of Unity Station had neutralized the threats from both General Krell's loyalists and Admiral Stone's operatives. As the dust settled and the immediate danger passed, Brian found himself thrust into a world that had changed dramatically during his 5 years in stasis. The sight of humans and Wadi working side by side still seemed surreal to him, a testament to the progress made in his absence. In the days that followed, Brian split his time between briefings on the current state of human-Wadi relations and keeping vigil by Nina's pod. Dr. Chen and her team worked tirelessly to safely bring Nina and their hybrid embryo out of stasis. Finally, after weeks of careful preparations, Nina opened her eyes to a changed universe. The reunion between Brian and Nina was emotional, filled with joy, relief, and a sense of trepidation about the challenges that lay ahead. As Nina's pregnancy progressed, Unity Station settled into a new routine. The facility buzzed with activity as scientists, medical personnel, and security teams worked around the clock to ensure the safety and health of the expectant parents and their unprecedented child. Dr. Chen led a diverse team of human and Wadi experts in monitoring Nina's condition. The hybrid embryo's accelerated growth rate fascinated and concerned the medical staff in equal measure. Nina's body continued to adapt to the unique demands of the interspecies pregnancy, with Dr. Chen meticulously documenting every change. 6 months into the pregnancy, an unexpected complication arose. Brian was in the medical bay with Nina for a routine checkup when her form suddenly began to shift. Her features blurred, rapidly alternating between human and Wadi appearances. "Nina!" Brian called out, reaching for her hand as she grimaced in pain. Dr. Chen rushed to Nina's side, her eyes widening as she observed the uncontrolled transformations. "Her shape-shifting abilities are fluctuating," she explained, her fingers flying over a nearby console. "It appears to be a reaction to the hybrid embryo's unique genetic makeup." Over the next few days, Nina's condition worsened. Her body shifted unpredictably, causing her intense discomfort and posing a significant risk to both her and the unborn child. Brian remained by her side, his face etched with worry as he watched her struggle. Dr. Chen and her team worked around the clock, analyzing data and exploring potential solutions. After extensive research and heated debates, they proposed a risky procedure involving the ancient Wadi genetic technology. "We believe we can use a modified version of the DNA recombination device to harmonize Nina's shape-shifting abilities with the hybrid embryo's genetic code," Dr. Chen explained to Brian and Nina. "However, I must warn you that this procedure carries the risk of causing irreversible changes to Nina's physiology." As Brian and Nina grappled with this difficult decision, Unity Station's sensors detected an incoming fleet of ships. Major Knox's voice came over the intercom, her tone tense. Unknown vessels approaching. They've bypassed our outer defenses using advanced cloaking technology. The station erupted into a flurry of activity as security protocols were initiated. Brian reluctantly left Nina's side to join Major Knox in the command center. They watched as the mysterious fleet decloaked, revealing sleek ships of unfamiliar design. "This is Commander Lyra of the Wadi Exodus," a calm voice transmitted across the communications channel. "We come in peace, bearing knowledge that may be crucial to the survival of the hybrid child." Brian and Major Knox exchanged wary glances. The arrival of these exiled Wadi added yet another layer of complexity to an already precarious situation. As they prepared to respond to Commander Lyra's hail, Nina's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Alarms blared throughout the medical bay as Nina's shape-shifting became increasingly erratic. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, urgency evident in her tone. "Brian, we need you in medical immediately. We have to make a decision about the procedure now." Torn between his duties and his love for Nina, Brian raced back to the medical bay. As he ran, he couldn't shake the feeling that the arrival of the exiled Wadi and Nina's worsening condition were somehow connected. Whatever came next, he knew that the choices made in the coming hours would shape not only their future, but potentially the future of both human and Wadi civilizations. Brian's heart raced as he watched the medical team work feverishly to stabilize Nina. The procedure to harmonize her shape-shifting abilities with the hybrid embryo's genetic code had been successful, but at a cost. Nina's body had undergone significant changes, her form now a constant flux between human and Wadi features. As the medical crisis subsided, a new threat emerged. Alarms blared throughout Unity Station, and Major Knox's voice crackled over the intercom. "Security breach in Sector 7. Unauthorized shuttle launch detected." Brian sprinted to the command center, his mind turning from the rapid succession of events. He arrived to find Major Knox coordinating a response team, her face grim as she tracked the escaping shuttle on the main view screen. "What happened?" Brian demanded, scanning the tactical displays. Knox's lips pursed. "One of Commander Lyra's team went rogue. They've stolen a sample of the hybrid embryo's genetic material." The implications hit Brian like a physical blow. Their child's unique DNA, now in the hands of an unknown party, could be used for purposes they couldn't begin to fathom. As Unity Station erupted into a flurry of activity, with security teams scrambling to contain the breach and track the stolen shuttle, Brian found himself torn between his duty to the station and his commitment to Nina and their unborn child. Days passed in a blur of heightened security protocols and endless debriefings. Nina's condition stabilized, but her pregnancy progressed at an alarming rate. Dr. Chen and her team worked around the clock, monitoring every change in Nina's rapidly evolving physiology. Then, without warning, Nina went into labor. Brian rushed to the medical bay, his heart pounding as he heard Nina's cries of pain echoing through the corridors. He burst through the doors to find Dr. Chen already in action, surrounded by a mixed team of human and Wadi medical staff. "Brian!" Nina called out, her voice strained. Her form shifted rapidly, human features blending into Wadi and back again, as contractions racked her body. He was at her side in an instant, grasping her hand. "I'm here, Nina. I'm not going anywhere." The next 18 hours were a testament to Nina's strength and the medical team's expertise. Brian watched in awe as Dr. Chen navigated the unprecedented challenges of the hybrid birth, her calm demeanor never wavering, even as Nina's body underwent seemingly impossible transformations. Finally, with one last push and a cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of Unity Station, their daughter was born. "She's beautiful," Dr. Chen whispered, cradling the newborn in her arms. She placed the child on Nina's chest, and Brian felt his breath catch in his throat. Their daughter was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with a subtle iridescence, tiny scales blending seamlessly with smooth human skin. As she opened her eyes, Brian gasped. They were a swirling mix of colors, shifting and changing as she took in her first glimpses of the world. "Aurora," Nina murmured, her voice filled with wonder. Her name is Aurora. As news of Aurora's birth spread throughout Unity Station, Brian could feel the shift in the air. The child represented hope, a living bridge between two species that had once been locked in bitter conflict. But with that hope came danger. Commander Lyra requested a meeting, her normally stoic features etched with concern. In a private conference room, she revealed the truth behind the genetic theft. The rogue operative was Zephyr, my former second-in-command, Lyra explained, her voice tight with suppressed anger. He believes the hybrid genetics hold the key to unimaginable power. He plans to create his own hybrids, to dominate both our species. The gravity of the situation settled over the room. Major Knox was the first to speak. We need to assemble a task force immediately. We can't let Zephyr succeed. Brian nodded, his military instincts kicking in. I'll lead the mission. We need to recover that genetic material before it's too late. I'm coming too, Nina interjected, her voice leaving no room for argument. My abilities and knowledge of the hybrid genetics could be crucial. Dr. Chen raised concerns about separating Aurora from her parents so soon after birth, but a compromise was reached. The child would remain on Unity Station under heavy protection, with Dr. Chen overseeing her care. As Brian and Nina prepared for the dangerous mission ahead, Unity Station buzzed with activity. Dr. Vex, the brilliant Wadi scientist, unveiled cutting-edge equipment for the task force, including adaptive camouflage suits that mimicked Nina's shape-shifting abilities. The joint human-Wadi team, dubbed Operation Stardust, underwent intensive training. Brian watched with pride as soldiers from both species worked in perfect harmony, their unique abilities complementing each other in ways he never thought possible. Finally, the day of departure arrived. Brian and Nina stood at the airlock, sharing one last moment with Aurora before boarding the stealth vessel that would carry them into the unknown. As the airlock sealed behind them, Brian felt a mix of tenacity and trepidation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that the fate of both their species and the future of their daughter hung in the balance. The stealth vessel slipped away from Unity Station, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to all but the most sophisticated sensors. As they embarked on their perilous mission, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. Imagine, the vastness of space enveloped their ship as they embarked on a mission that would determine the fate of not just their daughter, but potentially both their species. As they approached their destination, an abandoned space station floating in the depths of an uncharted sector, Brian felt the familiar tension of pre-mission jitters. He glanced at Nina, her features a mix of willpower and concern, constantly shifting between human and Wadi appearances. We're approaching the station, Major Knox's voice crackled over the comm. Sensors detect multiple life signs. Looks like Zephyr's been busy. Brian nodded, his mind focused. All right, team. We've trained for this. Remember, our primary objective is to recover the genetic sample. Engage hostiles only if necessary. The stealth vessel docked with the abandoned station, its cloaking technology ensuring their arrival went unnoticed. As the airlock hissed open, Brian and Nina led the task force into the dimly lit corridors, their adaptive camouflage suits adjusting to match the metallic surroundings. They moved silently through the station, the eerie quiet broken only by the distant hum of machinery. As they neared the central chamber, the sound of voices grew louder. Brian held up a fist, signaling the team to halt. He peered around a corner, his eyes widening at the sight. In the vast central chamber, Zephyr stood surrounded by a group of followers, but the rogue scientist was barely recognizable. His form pulsed and shifted, a grotesque blend of human and Wadi features. Tendrils of energy crackled around him, evidence of his unstable hybridization. Behold, Zephyr's voice boomed, distorted and inhuman. The future of our species! Brian exchanged a glance with Nina, noting the horror in her eyes. They had known Zephyr's experiments were dangerous, but this was beyond their worst fears. Suddenly alarms blared throughout the station. Their presence had been detected. So much for the element of surprise, Nina muttered, her form rippling as she prepared for battle. The central chamber erupted into chaos. Zephyr's followers, themselves partially hybridized, rushed to confront the intruders. Brian's team sprang into action, their specialized training evident as they engaged the enemy. Brian found himself face-to-face with Zephyr, the rogue scientist's enhanced strength immediately apparent as he lashed out with shape-shifting limbs. "You don't understand," Zephyr roared, his features contorting. "This power could elevate both our species." Brian dodged a vicious swipe, retorting, "At what cost, Zephyr? Look at yourself." As the battle raged, Nina used her natural shape-shifting abilities to confuse and outmaneuver their opponents. She fought her way towards a sealed container on a nearby console, recognizing it as the one containing Aurora's genetic sample. Just as her fingers grasped the container, a holographic display flickered to life. Dr. Chen's face appeared, her expression grave. "Brian, Nina," she said urgently, her voice cutting through the sounds of combat. "Aurora's condition has deteriorated rapidly. We need that genetic material immediately. It's her only hope." The news hit Brian and Nina like a physical blow. Their daughter's life now hung in the balance, adding a new level of urgency to their mission. With renewed perseverance, Nina secured the container. "Brian," she called out, "I've got it!" But Zephyr, hearing her cry, turned his attention to the genetic sample. With a roar of rage, he lunged towards Nina, his body twisting into an even more monstrous form. Brian intercepted him, engaging in a desperate struggle on a narrow walkway above the station's pulsing power core. The two grappled, Brian's military training pitted against Zephyr's unnatural strength. "It's over, Zephyr," Brian grunted, straining against the hybrid's grip. "Your experiment has failed. Let us help you before it's too late." For a moment, a flicker of humanity crossed Zephyr's distorted features, but it was quickly replaced by manic drive. "No," he snarled. "I am the future." Suddenly, Zephyr's body began to lose cohesion, his unstable hybridization reaching a critical point. Parts of him shifted uncontrollably, and he lost his grip on the walkway. Brian reached out instinctively to save him, but Zephyr, consumed by madness and ambition, swatted his hand away. With a final inhuman cry, Zephyr plummeted towards the station's power core. The moment Zephyr's unstable form made contact with the energy field, a catastrophic reaction began. The station shuddered, alarms blaring with renewed intensity. "We need to evacuate now," Major Knox shouted over the comm. "This whole place is going to blow." Brian turned to see Nina already ushering team members towards the exit, the precious genetic sample clutched tightly to her chest. He joined her, helping to clear debris and guide their people to safety. As they raced back to their ship, the station began to break apart around them. Nina used her shape-shifting abilities to squeeze through collapsing corridors, creating paths for the others to follow. They reached the airlock just as a massive explosion rocked the station. The team piled into their vessel, and Brian initiated emergency launch procedures. Through the view screen, they watched the abandoned station erupt into a ball of fire and twisted metal. As their ship sped away from the destruction, Brian opened a channel to Unity Station. "Mission accomplished," he reported, his voice heavy with exhaustion and the weight of what they'd witnessed. "We've recovered the sample. Prepare for immediate treatment upon our arrival." Nina cradled the container holding their daughter's future, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "Hold on, Aurora," she whispered. "We're coming." As their ship streaked through space towards Unity Station, Brian and Nina knew that the hardest part of their journey still lay ahead. The fate of their daughter, and perhaps the future of human-Wadi relations, now rested on the success of a medical procedure they could only hope would work. The station grew larger in their view screen, a beacon of hope in the vast emptiness of space. Space. Unity Station loomed before them, a beacon of hope amidst the stars. As soon as their ship docked, Brian and Nina sprinted through the corridors, the precious genetic sample clutched tightly in Nina's arms. They burst into the medical bay, where Dr. Chen and her team were already poised for action. The sight of Aurora stopped them in their tracks. Their daughter lay motionless on a biobed, her once vibrant skin now ashen and dull. Her eyes, which had sparkled with a kaleidoscope of colors, were closed and sunken. "We need to begin immediately," Dr. Chen said, her voice calm but urgent. She took the genetic sample from Nina and placed it into a complex-looking device. This procedure is highly experimental. We'll be integrating the recovered genetic material with Aurora's existing DNA to stabilize her hybrid physiology. Brian and Nina watched, their hearts racing, as the medical team swarmed around their daughter. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing Aurora's genetic structure in intricate detail. Dr. Chen's fingers flew over the controls, initiating the delicate process of genetic manipulation. Hours crawled by. Brian paced the floor, while Nina remained stock still, her eyes never leaving Aurora's face. The constant beep of medical equipment filled the air, a rhythmic reminder of the precarious thread their daughter's life hung upon. A commotion at the door drew their attention. Major Zara Knox entered, her face grim. "I need to debrief you on the aftermath of the mission," she said, her voice low. Brian nodded, reluctantly tearing his gaze from Aurora. "What's the situation?" "The destruction of Zephyr's station has caused quite a stir," Knox explained. "Both human and Wadi governments are in uproar. There are debates raging about the ethics of hybrid technology and its potential as a weapon." Nina's form rippled, a physical manifestation of her distress. "That doesn't matter right now. All that matters is Aurora." As if on cue, alarms blared from the medical equipment. Dr. Chen and her team rushed to Aurora's side, their movements frantic. "We're losing her," Chen shouted. "Clear the room." Brian and Nina found themselves ushered out, pressed against a transparent barrier. They watched in horror as their daughter's vital signs flatlined. The medical team sprang into action. Human defibrillators crackled with energy, while Wadi doctors channeled strange, shimmering forces into Aurora's small body. Again and again, they attempted to restart her hybrid heart. Suddenly, Aurora's body arched off the bed, engulfed in a blinding light. The intensity forced everyone to shield their eyes. When the glow faded, the room fell into an eerie silence. Dr. Chen approached Brian and Nina, her face a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "She's stable," she announced. "More than stable, actually. The integration of the genetic material has unlocked dormant abilities within her DNA. Her regenerative capabilities are off the charts, and her control over her shape-shifting abilities is unprecedented." Relief washed over Brian and Nina, quickly followed by a new wave of concern. The implications of Aurora's enhanced abilities were staggering. Major Knox, who had witnessed the entire event, immediately stepped forward. "We need to implement enhanced security protocols," she said, already tapping commands into her datapad. "This changes everything." As Aurora's condition stabilized, news of her survival and newfound abilities spread through Unity Station like wildfire. The buzz of excitement was palpable, but so was an undercurrent of tension. Commander Lyra, leader of the exiled Wadi faction, requested an urgent meeting with Brian, Nina, and the station's leadership. In a private conference room, her eyes gleaming with an intense light, she revealed ancient Wadi prophecies. "Our oldest texts speak of a hybrid child with extraordinary abilities," Lyra explained, her voice reverent. "A child who would bridge our species and usher in a new era of unity and advancement." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Some saw it as a sign of hope, while others shifted uncomfortably, wary of the implications. In the days that followed, Unity Station became a hub of frenetic activity. Scientists clamored to study Aurora's unique physiology, while diplomats from both human and Wadi worlds arrived in droves, eager to witness the hybrid child's progress. Brian and Nina found themselves at the center of a political and scientific storm. They worked closely with Dr. Chen, learning to understand and nurture Aurora's developing abilities. All the while, Major Knox's security team maintained a constant, vigilant presence. As Aurora grew stronger, her powers continued to manifest in astonishing ways. She could shift her form with a precision that surpassed even Nina's abilities, and injuries that would have been life-threatening to others healed in a matter of hours. The research facilities on Unity Station expanded rapidly to accommodate new joint studies into hybrid genetics. The potential applications of Aurora's abilities seemed limitless, sparking both excitement and fear among the station's inhabitants. However, not all reactions were positive. Reports began to surface of extremist groups forming on both human and Wadi worlds. These factions viewed Aurora and her parents as a threat to the purity of their respective species, and whispers of plots against them began to circulate. As Brian and Nina stood in Aurora's new high-security quarters, watching their daughter manipulate her form with childlike glee, they couldn't help but feel the weight of their new reality. They were no longer just parents, but reluctant symbols of a new era in human-Wadi relations. "What do we do now?" Nina asked, her form shimmering with anxiety. Brian took her hand, his eyes fixed on Aurora. "We protect her, we guide her, and we hope that she can be the bridge our species need." Outside their window, Unity Station hummed with activity, a microcosm of the changing galaxy. As human and Wadi scientists worked side by side and diplomats engaged in heated discussions, the future of both species hung in the balance. And at the center of it all was Aurora, a child of two worlds whose extraordinary abilities could either unite or divide them. As the months passed, Unity Station continued to buzz with activity. Brian and Nina devoted themselves to Aurora's care, marveling at her rapid development and the emergence of her extraordinary abilities. On the eve of Aurora's 5th birthday, the station hummed with anticipation. Dignitaries from both human and Wadi worlds arrived in droves, eager to witness the celebration of the galaxy's most famous child. The grand atrium of Unity Station had been transformed into a shimmering wonderland. Holographic displays cast a soft, ethereal glow over the gathered crowd. Humans in formal attire mingled with Wadi in their traditional iridescent robes, their differences fading in the face of shared excitement. Aurora stood at the center of it all, her eyes wide with wonder. Her skin rippled with subtle patterns, a testament to her hybrid nature. Brian knelt beside her, straightening the collar of her specially designed outfit. "Ready for your big moment, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice filled with pride and a hint of apprehension. Aurora nodded, her gaze fixed on the expectant faces of the crowd. Nina joined them, her form shimmering slightly with nervous energy. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered, giving Aurora's hand a gentle squeeze. As the official ceremony began, Commander Lyra stepped forward to address the assembly. "Today, we celebrate not just a birthday, but a new chapter in the history of our peoples," she announced, her voice carrying across the atrium. Aurora took a deep breath and stepped onto the raised platform. With a look of intense concentration, she began to shift. Her form flowed like liquid mercury, seamlessly transitioning between human and Wadi appearances. Gasps of awe rippled through the crowd as Aurora demonstrated control far beyond her years. Applause erupted as Aurora completed her display, returning to her natural hybrid form. She beamed with pride, looking to her parents for approval. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the station. Alarms blared as smoke billowed from a nearby corridor. Panic spread through the crowd as armed figures in nondescript uniforms burst into the atrium. "Protect the child!" Major Knox's voice cut through the chaos as she mobilized her security team. Brian's military instincts kicked in. He scooped Aurora into his arms and sprinted for cover. Nina close behind. As they ducked behind a row of consoles, Brian caught sight of two figures leading the attack. A stern-faced human man and a Wadi with pulsating markings of rage. "Ezra Thorne and Vox Nina hissed, recognizing the leaders of the extremist factions they'd been warned about. Across the atrium, Commander Lyra rallied a group of Wadi diplomats. "Defensive formation Delta!" she shouted, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air. A shimmering barrier sprang to life, deflecting a barrage of energy weapons. Major Knox's voice crackled over the comms. "All security personnel, converge on the central hub. Protect Aurora at all costs." Brian and Nina exchanged a determined look. They had trained for this, had known this day might come. With practiced coordination, they began to move through the chaos, using Nina's shape-shifting abilities to blend in with the panicked crowd. Aurora clung to Brian's neck, her eyes wide with fear but also a spark of tenacity. "I can help," she whispered. Before Brian could respond, a group of attackers rounded the corner. Aurora's body shimmered, and suddenly 3 identical versions of her appeared, running in different directions. The attackers hesitated, confused by the multiple targets. Nina seized the opportunity, her form flowing into a perfect replica of one of the extremists. She strode confidently towards the group, barking orders in their own coded language. The ruse bought them precious seconds to slip away. As they navigated the twisting corridors of Unity Station, evidence of the battle was everywhere. Scorch marks marred the walls, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of weapons fire. In the distance, they could hear the clash of Wadi energy weapons against human firearms. They rounded a corner and found themselves face-to-face with Dr. Chen, her lab coat singed and her hair in disarray. "This way," she said urgently, ushering them into a hidden alcove. "I've secured the vital research data, but we need to get Aurora to the safe room." As they hurried through the station's less-traveled maintenance tunnels, Aurora's voice piped up. "Mom! Dad, look!" They paused, watching in amazement as Aurora placed her hand on an injured security officer they encountered. A soft glow emanated from her palm, and the man's wounds began to close before their eyes. "Extraordinary," Dr. Chen murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding the urgency of their situation. The moment of wonder was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. Brian readied his weapon, while Nina prepared to shift forms once again. "Well, well," a cold voice echoed through the corridor. "The family of the hour trying to sneak away from their own party." Ezra Thorne stepped into view, flanked by Voxer and a squad of heavily armed extremists. In his hand, he held a device that pulsed with an ominous energy. "Did you really think you could hide from us?" Voxer hissed, his Wadi markings flashing with malevolence. Brian and Nina moved in front of Aurora, shielding her with their bodies. Dr. Chen frantically tapped commands into her datapad, trying to summon reinforcements. "We don't want to hurt anyone," Brian said, his voice steady despite the tension. "There's still a chance to end this peacefully." Thorne's laugh was devoid of humor. "Peace? There can be no peace while abominations like her exist." He raised the device, its glow intensifying. "This will undo everything you've worked for, returning the natural order to our species." As Thorne's finger hovered over the activation switch, Aurora stepped forward, her eyes a swirling mix of human and Wadi colors, fixed on the extremist leaders. "No," she said, her voice ringing with a power beyond her years. "You're wrong." A pulse of energy erupted from Aurora's small form, enveloping everyone in the corridor. Brian and Nina watched in awe as a shimmering field expanded outward, immobilizing the attackers and bathing the area in a soft, pulsating light. Within the energy field, something extraordinary began to unfold.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.